All right, we're live, y'all.
Sweet.
So we were talking before this about a number of other things, but we decided we would focus on the first acquisition that you made.
Yes.
Where should
Thankfully, enabled by micro-acquire, no less.
we shame
Very
on
important. Very, very important. It's like I think it's like without micro-acquire, it would have taken at least another 3, 4 months just to find like that kind of deal,
Wait, let
you
me
know.
ask you though. Okay, so describe what was the first deal that you did?
So I bought a B2B SaaS Shopify app called Reconciley, which basically helps Shopify stores uh, send all of their payout transactions and all of that accounting data over to Xero automatically, which usually takes like 20 to 25 hours to reconcile every single transaction that happened throughout the month. Um, and I bought that end of February, and it's been ticking along ever since. Yeah, first acquisition of the fund.
Nice. And I remember that one. It had like 50 people. There was a lot of people interested in it. How do you think you stood out on that acquisition?
By far, um, I think when the acquisition was listed, I remember it like listing in the middle of the night. I saw it come out, and I knew that it would be like a hot one. Um, but it was really expensive. So like they were reporting, like 73K in our ARR and asking for 350K, which was I found outrageous for like that kind of product. Um, but I didn't mind. Like I still got in touch. I still basically did my thing and basically made an offer which is completely outside of the norm. Like normally I would get in touch with them, I would meet them. Because I knew that this was like a really fast deal, I made an offer up front. I was like, hey, will you accept $180,000 in cash, which is straight up half of his ask? And I just sent that outright into the chat. And I actually said, like, will you accept 180K? And he replied, like, within minutes, like, would that be in cash? And I found that to be a really strong qualifier. Like, okay, like for starters, you're actually looking to sell. Secondly, you answered really quickly. So there's like a bunch of interest in my last response. And then you're asking if it's all cash, which is like a seller's question, like you're really there. And I basically said, yep, all cash, like ready to move really quickly if you want to move really quickly. And that's basically like within a few days an LOI was drafted thanks to that. I was just able to just cut through the noise and go straight for the goal. I was
Nice.
like,
Yeah, I think definitely moving quickly and having cash offers is definitely a huge benefit and a way to stand out as a potential buyer. What did you do for due diligence? Like what are like maybe your top three tips or things that
hmm.
you kind of like things that you look for when you do due diligence on something?
So the first thing is like how true is the revenue? Because like reporting revenue is one thing, but actually being able to look at the historical, like how much they actually build. It's one thing to report a run rate; it's another to report what you actually build. And like once you do that, you tend to find patterns. Like for instance, I'm looking at a deal right now that on like on those fundamentals looks really good, but then when you chart the revenues, you can clearly see that the revenue capped out. And then that was a pattern I identified, and it made me ask like, wait, what's the churn rate on this? And then when I looked at it, the churn rate was so extreme that the revenue could no longer go any further because of that. And so I withdrew because of that. But like that's the thing, it's just like get a visual representation of the revenue so that you can pattern find is the first thing. The second thing is like same thing with costs. Like, like everybody wants to report a high profit, but then everybody like reports on their costs differently. At the end of the day, like you want to get an idea of what you need to spend to maintain what you have, like and get a clear picture on the profit. And then at the same time, you want to base your offer on that profit number. Like I don't really make offers on ARR. I make offers on EBITDA. Like that's the whole point is how much can I get out on my investment. And then the last one is like invest in what you know for sure. Like the whole advantage is that you're buying something to operate it without having to start it from scratch. But you wouldn't start something from scratch that you don't understand. So like only buy things that you understand so that you can actually benefit from what you do know and apply it to that thing. Like the only reason I was interested in Reconciley, for instance, is like my wife is a CPA. I've been through many tax seasons through with her, and so I've been exposed to this kind of stuff. I use Xero all the time. I'm a Shopify app developer, and like it all, all these stars were aligning. And then the product was really simple. So like it made a lot of sense for me to acquire something I understand and can work on. Yeah, that's what I would say.
That's awesome. Tell me about your goal. I know what it is, but you have a fund. Tell me the name. Tell me your goal. What are you looking to accomplish over the next like 2, 3, 30
Sure.
years?
Sure. I don't know about 30 years for sure, especially, but Microangel is the name of the fund. Basically, the idea is like literally a small angel. What would that look like? Somebody who hasn't had a huge win in the past, but might have like saved up some money, and like challenging the notion that the only way you can get into startups full time, like almost like indie hackers, if you will, is to start from scratch. And what would that look like? And so my goal basically is to invest, like I'm investing $500,000 over the next few months, which I'm almost done. And the goal is to hold the products that I'm going to buy, really simple micro-SaaS products, to hold these for a period of 2 years. And over that period of 2 years to basically perceive all of the revenues that those micro-SaaS products produce as personal income. And since they're high profit, I can basically leverage that as my take-home pay. And because I do that, I no longer need to sell like half of my time as a freelancer or something like that, or work only nights and weekends or something like that to work on any projects that I want to work on that feel like play. Knowing that the products, like over those 2 years, those products will keep really steadily growing because they're simple products, but I only invest in products that grow over time really slowly. And because they are growing really slowly over a period of 2 years, they'll reach a certain point where the value of my portfolio will allow me to sell it so I can perceive a 2x return on that $500,000 2 years later. And that's kind of the idea. So like for 2 years, can somebody take a sum of money, invest it in micro SaaS products that throw out high margin MRRs, use that MRR as revenue for some period of time, use that new available time to materialize like whatever bootstrapped product or whatever, like be ambitious really and do things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And then when the time comes to like go all in on your project, you can basically sell off that portfolio, which will have grown over time, and then use that to go all in and focus on the one thing that by now is taken off. That's kind of the model that I'm trying to prove out. And the idea is that if this works, and I'll know in a couple of months just by like the direction of that it's going, I want to enable more people to basically do it. And I'm like, my initial reaction was to just raise a rolling fund and just invest in more products and do things like that. But I think instead what I'll probably do is like enable more people to go full time. Like that's the main thing. It's like for every person who manages to be an indie hacker, like, and what I mean by that is the person who signs up to the pain and like do it all from scratch and like has the skills and all those things. For every one of those, there's maybe 100 or 200 who kind of have the skills, but not like can't actually get into it for whatever life circumstantial reason there might be. And it'd be really cool if there was like a fund that basically let you keep all the MRR. So like, imagine I would give you a SaaS that the fund would buy, you would operate it for a certain period of time, keep everything that you make, but then when we sell, we're the ones that take, for instance, the return. And in that time, this individual would have basically built up a bunch of experience, would have stripes, like they've earned their stripes, and then could potentially buy something bigger. And like, I think that's where I'm headed. It's like a tiered incubator / accelerator, something like that approach, where I can continue to invest in it as an investor. Because like the idea is like, if this model works, I'll continue doing it as an individual. like with another $500,000, for example. But then how do I scale this? And the idea of scaling this is more like, I don't need that MRR as part of my fund. What I care about is the eventual returns that I can, get from enabling dozens or hundreds of entrepreneurs to do this rather than just me on my own. That's what I'm exploring right now.
That's awesome. So to kind of simplify that, you would acquire a company asset and then you would place a young operator to help grow, manage that either company or application. Is that kind of right?
Pretty much, and like let them benefit from the product in its entirety. But then when the time comes to sell it, and I don't know yet if like probably they would have to have some skin in the game. Maybe they vest it, for 2 years, whatever that is. But like to make it more easy to get into startups, but then reduce that initial failure rate. And the way we do that is we buy instead of build from scratch. The second one is like mentorship. So like I've been through the ringer dozens of times, and like somebody who does it for the first time, even though I give them a product that's sort of running on their own, they still have to have an idea of what to do. But the advantage now is like, like when you start something from scratch, you have to know everything and you have to learn everything and you have to do everything
On the fly
well,
too. You gotta learn it, like as
for sure.
you're
It's like
basically
all
you're learning how to
hats.
put out fires, basically.
That's right. The advantage with something when you buy it is that it's more focused chaos. Like you're buying something where you know where the fire is and you know exactly, like you have a playbook for how to fix it. And the difference is that instead of you doing it on your own, we would be enabling other people, showing them the ropes in a really specific context. And they would be learning things in the context of making a product get better, which to me is more important than like, like market product fit is super important, but it's a singular event in the life of a product. Like after you're done with that, then everything starts, like that's so much more important, in my view now is how you execute. So yeah, that's what I'm exploring.
I like that. And I completely agree with you. I think you learn the most in startups when you actually are involved in one instead of just reading about it, talking about it. So I like that. That's a way of getting, young entrepreneurs who might go down the path of building something. It doesn't work out. They just wasted a bunch of their savings, and you could kind of help them by putting them into a, product with paying customers more to kind of, move around, so to speak.
Yep.
I guess my 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 next question would be, so you're doing all this, really awesome and interesting stuff and you're sharing it with everybody. What how did you learn to, acquire companies, or what advice would you give to someone, square one? They're like, I'm interested in doing something similar. I'd like to buy maybe one SaaS company. What resources would you recommend checking out aside from yours? Because yours is awesome. That should be a no-brainer. But where
Yeah.
would you start in terms, like, how did you learn how to put this together? What would you recommend to yourself if you're just starting?
That's tough because like coming up with this idea wasn't like a weekend. Like I've been thinking about this stuff for years. Like for me, it was a wall that I was trying to get through. And that wall was I didn't have any resources that I felt I could dedicate. And that changed over the last few years. And like it enabled me, so to speak, to start this fund, right? Like not everybody has a $500,000 lying around, right?
Let me reword that. I guess not
Yep.
resource as in like financial. I meant
Sure.
like
Oh,
blog.
learning.
Yeah,
Sure.
like how did you learn? How did you get the confidence to say, "Hey, I can acquire a SaaS company and I don't have to be
Sure.
Google or Apple to do it"?
Sure. I mean, I've been, in tech for like 15 years at this point. I've worn the CEO hat a few times, so I've learned through failure more than anything. But a lot of like I've built a style over time. So like there are books like The E-Myth Revisited, like one of those books that has just changed the way that I think about business. So like there are a few moments in my life that caused me to create like my style. And like over the past, I would say like 5 years, I did so much. Basically, I helped startups grow really big, really fast. Like that was my personal value prop. I was basically a VP of growth for a bunch of startups. So I know how to do this on the field. And like I earned my reputation locally in Montreal because like I actually walk the walk. I do the stuff. I'm like a marketer that can code, but then also do the stuff, not just write about it or sell, education on it, so to speak. So like that's what I would say is just like walk the walk. Like start by figuring out what it is that you are looking for and like try to materialize that future. And what I mean by that is like if you have a certain set of skills that has or a certain kind of experience over your lifetime that has suddenly caused you to say, yep, I can do this on my own, like I can, or you're suddenly interested in buying something, the reason that's happening is because inside like there's some experience that is pushing you to say like, yeah, I could do that. Like I would just say like feed that and go from there. You know, like every person will buy things differently. You know, like I get a bunch of Twitter DMs from different angles. Like someone will come in with like the minutia, like, you know, how do you cut up the payments and like over what period of time? And like those things don't really matter. You know, like what really matters is whether a deal happened, whether both sides are happy, whether you feel like you know what you're going to do. You know, like at the end of the day, this is way less rocket science than it might appear. You know, like you're trying to find people who are working on stuff that you like, that you identify with for a market that you understand. And like, really, then you're trying to convince them to give up their product in exchange for like in a transaction. Like everything is so different that you can approach it really humanly. Like that's the first thing that I would say is just approach it like a human and talk to people and meet them and like understand their motivations and be really clear about what your motivations are. And what you'll find is that especially through places like micro-acquire, because there's so much deal flow, you'll have like in a volume that suddenly you'll identify some of those people that kind of think like you or work on products that are interested, you know, that you're interested in. So I just say that like expose yourself, but be really clear about what it is that you're looking for. And if you approach it like from the perspective of, I don't know, if I were to start something from scratch today, odds are I would work on something that I know and that I'm interested in, like go from the same direction. But the difference is that you'll have to then produce, like there will be a transactional component at some point. That's really the difference between buying and starting something.
Yeah.
That's really it. And then you're just dealing with a different set of challenges, I think, than starting from scratch.
I like how you said that just be human, because honestly, the most successful people I've seen on microacquire, approach people in a way where they value the relationship. Because like you just said with the first app that you acquired, the price was too high, but you still communicated with the potential seller. You built that relationship or you fostered it, and you
Mhm.
never know where things can change and you start to, maybe get on the same page with the seller.
Yeah.
So I definitely like that advice. I guess maybe just, final questions are, who do you look up to? Like, who do you look for inspiration or, favorite authors, uh, anything?
That's a tough one on the spot because like I'm a firm believer in like you're the five people that you hang out and read about the most, you know?
Yeah.
And I change those five people all the time because otherwise like you just become one kind of person. And for that reason I just read a bunch of different kinds of things at different kinds of time. Like right now I'm getting interested in 3D printing. I have no idea what seed there was that was planted in my brain somewhere along the lines, but suddenly I'm looking up 3D printing like books. But over time I had a mentor back at Founder Fuel. So like he's not on Twitter or anything like that, but like an accelerator that I went through in Montreal back in like 2011, 2012. And this guy, John Stokes, basically taught me like how to communicate. Like that's a very like in italics, like how do you pitch really like a typical startup, but like you broke it way down to like stop like complicating things and be human about it. Like you are trying to get someone to understand some insight that you have that is going to make them understand your product or your startup or whatever it is, and like break it down into like these 5 or 10 different buckets and like walk them through. And like he made me understand how to communicate really, and that helped me throughout my life. uh, another person is probably Ryan Dice from Digital Marketer. So Ryan basically like back, I would say like 5+ years ago when he was still like actively creating the content himself, um, was driving like all of that content through his own experiences. So it wasn't like frameworks and things like that. It was like I did this, it worked, here's how you could do it too. And he made me really think about just like demand generation and customer acquisition very differently. Where in the past, like I was really like leading from the gut, like what ideas can I come up with to attract people, like,
Yeah.
and it broke it down to just like economics of like, what are the different funnel pieces and like, how do you, like, I made me understand marketing in numbers, I guess. And then that actually translated to things, like analytics in the product, like mix panel, and like actually taking these learnings at the marketing layer and applying it to the product and growth marketing and things like that. Really interesting stuff. Like I mentioned, eMyth Revisited, like this idea of building systems so you work on the business instead of inside the business is just a huge thing.
Oh
Like,
yeah, that's a total mindset change. I meet a ton of entrepreneurs that are deeply working in the business, but when you start working on the business, that's when you get the significant changes. So that's a key learning right there for sure.
knowing how to zoom in, knowing how to zoom out, like recognizing whether you're zoomed in or zoomed out, like how the pieces fit together. It just made me a more strategic person,
Yeah.
and then all those things together, it just makes me more deliberate about like, like if you're setting a goal, like what are the things that happen for that goal to actually happen? And it's funny because like, it's less scary today than it was before because I recognize it. And I don't mean like this in an arrogant way, but like, there's this idea of like how a master becomes a master. So like you start off by thinking you know everything. So like it goes like this. And
Yeah.
then as you learn things, it goes way back down because you realize like, oh wait, I don't actually know anything. But still, like as you learn more over time, you like you get a white beard and you're like old and you're super wise, you still don't think you know everything. And that's when you're a master, like, and I feel like I'm starting to get to that point where I feel like I still don't know everything, but I'm much more comfortable with that because I know what my style is today and I know how to apply it. And, I find comfort in that basically.
Nice. I like that. I guess final question is, so I've been watching your journey and you're documenting every part of it. If people want to learn more about MicroAngel, yourself, and the deals that you're closing, where can they find you? Where can they subscribe to your newsletter?
Cool. So I'm on Twitter at Eyal Toledano. You can read the newsletter at microangel.so. It's free, mostly free. And I try basically to write as much as I can. And right now it's focused on things like how I'm buying stuff, but over the next few months, it's going to start transitioning to how I'm fixing the products that I've acquired and how I'm going to operate and grow them. And so it's going to be a journey over the next 2 years. And microangel.so is where you can find it.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me on this podcast, and definitely check out MicroAngel because y'all's documenting every single part of buying companies, growing them, and maybe one day this will be $1 billion fund or something.
God willing.
All right. Thanks for joining me.
Cheers, man.